So if I were to ask you, as you're listening to this right now, to just picture Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, you probably have a very specific image in your head.
Oh, yeah. Usually kneeling by a rock.
Exactly. Kneeling by a rock, sweating drops of blood.
Right, looking up at the sky.
Yeah, and then later when he's finally on the cross, taking his last breath, you probably hear him whisper, "It is finished."
Which is the classic, cinematic ending.
Right. But, and this is the secret that biblical scholars have known for a very long time, that specific seamless version of the story, it never actually happened like that.
Yeah, not in the way we think it did.
No.
No.
Because for centuries, we have essentially taken four completely distinct and sometimes totally contradictory historical accounts, and we've just mashed them together into a Hollywood movie script.
Just the ultimate director's cut, basically.
Yeah, exactly. We take a little of the bloody sweat from the Gospel of Luke.
Right.
We mix it with the victorious, "It is finished," from the Gospel of John.
Yeah.
And then we throw in this terrifying sense of abandonment from the Gospel of Mark. And we create this Frankenstein narrative.
Which, to be fair, makes sense. I mean, human brains crave a unified timeline.
We want a documentary. We want it clean, chronological, and comforting. We want that one definitive camera angle on history.
We do. And this instinct to blend everything together is so ancient. I mean, as early as the 2nd century, there was a Christian writer named Tatian who actually tried to do this officially.
Oh, really? Like an official mashup?
Yeah, it was called the Diatessaron.
Yeah.
He basically wove all 4 Gospels into a single continuous narrative just to, iron out all the wrinkles and contradictions.
Wow. But, I mean, the problem with that is when you do that, when you flatten these texts into a single homogenized story, you actually destroy the profound artistry of the original authors.
You completely lose it. You lose those distinct theological lenses they were using to view this monumental event.
And uncovering those distinct lenses is exactly what we are doing today. Welcome to the Deep Dive. We are taking a profound, scholarly, and honestly deeply spiritual journey into the passion of Jesus of Nazareth.
From the Garden of Gethsemane all the way to the grave.
Exactly. And our bedrock for this exploration today is arguably one of the most exhaustive pieces of biblical scholarship ever produced.
Oh, without a doubt.
We're talking about the late Raymond E. Brown's 3-volume masterwork, The Death of the Messiah.
Just to give you an idea of the sheer scale of Brown's work here, we are talking about thousands of pages.
That's massive.
Meticulous line-by-line analysis. I mean, Brown spent over a decade analyzing every single Greek noun, every verb tense, every historical reference across these 4 texts.
Okay, let's unpack this, because someone might be listening and thinking, why do I need to care about Greek verb tenses?
Well, the reason this matters, whether you are deeply religious, seeking a spiritual anchor, or you're just, a student of history and literature, is that these specific narratives fundamentally rewired Western civilization.
They really did. I mean, they took a Roman crucifixion, which we have to remember was designed to be the absolute lowest, most shameful, degrading form of capital punishment in the ancient world.
Right. It was reserved only for rebellious slaves and political terrorists. It was state terror.
State terror. And these writers structurally transformed that horror into a narrative of ultimate cosmic triumph.
A story that has literally captivated billions of people over 2 millennia.
So understanding the literary and theological mechanisms of how these first-century writers accomplished that, it's basically a masterclass in human resilience and meaning-making.
Absolutely. And we are going to travel across a massive emotional spectrum today.
Right. We're going to see how Mark and Matthew paint a portrait of this totally isolated, utterly agonized Christ.
Then we'll look at how Luke takes that exact same historical moment and portrays a tranquil, forgiving, almost athletic martyr.
And finally, John, who just removes the victimhood entirely and gives us a sovereign, untouchable, divine conqueror.
But to even begin to see these portraits clearly, we have to change the way we read. We have to adopt the methodology of the scholar.
Which brings us to Raymond Brown's approach. He utilizes something called a horizontal reading method.
Right, because normally when most people open a Bible, they read vertically.
Yeah, you start at Mark chapter 1, and you just read straight down to the end of Mark.
Exactly, and then you flip the page, start Matthew, read straight down. It's a completely siloed experience.
But the horizontal method changes the architecture of reading entirely.
It does. I always tell people, imagine taking the 4 scrolls of the Gospels, unrolling them on a massive oak table side by side, and lining up a single specific event.
Like the arrest in the garden.
Yes, you look at how all four authors describe that exact same moment simultaneously.
Like, what specific Greek word does Mark use for sorrow here?
And does Luke use that same word? Or does he just delete it?
Right. Or what detail does John invent or add that the others completely ignore?
This comparative approach is really the only way to bring the unique, burning, theological agenda of each writer into sharp relief.
And the Passion narrative, so the sequence from the arrest to the burial, is totally unique in the Gospels because it's the longest consecutive narrative they have.
Yeah, by far.
Because if you look at the earlier chapters of Jesus' ministry, it's mostly just a collection of isolated vignettes.
Right. A healing of a blind man here.
A parable about seeds over there.
A sermon on a hill.
They're like loose pearls strung together on a necklace. You could almost shuffle them around.
You really could. But the Passion is a continuous, gripping, minute-by-minute drama.
It has acts, scenes, rising action, and a climax.
Because the early church likely circulated this Passion story as a continuous oral tradition long before the rest of the gospel accounts were ever fleshed out. It was the absolute core of their preaching.
Which leads us to a crucial distinction that Brown makes, and this is vital for our deep dive today. It's the difference between the historical Jesus and the theological Jesus.
Yes, this is foundational.
So, the historical Jesus represents the bedrock, factual events that secular historians and scholars generally agree actually happened in the first third of the first century in Roman Judea.
Right. The consensus is simply that a Jewish teacher named Jesus of Nazareth caused a disturbance in Jerusalem during Passover and was subsequently executed by crucifixion under the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate.
That is the historical skeleton.
Exactly. But the theological Jesus is the flesh and blood that the gospel writers put on that skeleton.
Because they weren't, modern journalists embedded with a Roman cohort, jotting down shorthand notes.
No, not at all. They were theologians. They took the raw, traumatic, historical facts of the crucifixion and they interpreted them.
They organized the memories, they amplified certain details, and they used very specific literary devices to convey profound spiritual truth to their distinct first century communities. Kind of makes me think of an art class. Like, imagine 4 different master painters sitting around the exact same mountain.
Oh, I like that.
Right. They are all looking at the same geological formation. But one painter is going through this period of deep depression, so he paints the mountain shrouded in dark, violent storm clouds.
Right.
But another painter wants to inspire awe, so he paints the mountain bathed in this golden, ethereal sunrise.
It's the exact same historical mountain.
Exactly. But the truth they are trying to communicate to the viewer is radically different.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The raw material is identical, but the finished portrait is shaped by the needs of the audience and the core convictions of the artist.
Wait, if that's the case, I have to push back here. Because there is a massive logical loophole that has always bothered me, especially as we're about to step into the Garden of Gethsemane.
Okay, let's hear it.
The texts explicitly tell us that Jesus goes off to pray alone, right?
Hmm.
And his closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, they literally fall asleep.
They do.
And then during the arrest, the text says they all scattered and fled into the night.
Yeah, complete abandonment.
So if his friends were completely unconscious and then they literally ran away, how do we have a historical record of Jesus' exact prayers? I mean, who was writing down, "Take this cup from me," if no one was awake to hear it?
Well, this raises an important question, and it's the classic stumbling block for the modern reader. We come to this expecting a transcript.
Right, a recording.
But we have to fundamentally recalibrate our expectations to the ancient literary genre we're actually dealing with here.
Okay, how so?
In the ancient world, writers often used an omniscient narrator technique to reveal the inner life of a protagonist. That was normal, but more importantly, the early Christians were grappling with a massive cognitive dissonance.
Their promised Messiah had just died a horrific, shameful death.
Exactly. They had to figure out how to explain the unexplainable, and the only vocabulary, the only conceptual framework they had to process this trauma was the Hebrew scriptures.
What Christians call the Old Testament.
Right. The Psalms of Lament, the prophecies of Isaiah, the ancient stories of the righteous sufferer.
So when they constructed the narrative of Jesus' private agony,
They utilized the language and imagery of the Old Testament to fill in the spiritual reality of what he experienced.
So it wasn't about faking a historical transcript?
No, they knew he faced impending death, they knew his character, and they framed that historical memory with profound scriptural poetry.
It was a way of saying, like, look, We don't have the audio recording, but based on the Psalms, this is the cosmic, spiritual truth of what his agony was.
Exactly. It's a form of midrashic storytelling. They were revealing the deeper truth of the event by anchoring it in the sacred texts of their ancestors.
Okay, with that scholar's lens firmly in place, let's actually step into the narrative itself.
Let's do it.
We are starting in the dark, the Garden of Gethsemane, this olive grove on the Mount of Olives just outside Jerusalem, and we are looking through the first lens, the Gospels of Mark and Matthew.
Which present the absolute starkest, most raw portrayal of the Passion.
Mark is the earliest gospel, right?
Yes, and his account is arguably the most brutal. I mean, Jesus has just left the Last Supper, which was this moment of profound intimacy, and immediately the atmosphere just plummets.
Mark's language is heavy. It's almost suffocating. He writes that Jesus began to be greatly distraught and troubled.
Jesus himself turns to his friends and says, "My soul is sorrowful unto death."
And he doesn't just kneel in quiet prayer.
Yeah.
Mark says he literally throws himself to the ground,
Yeah.
into the dirt. And he begins begging for the hour and the cup to pass from him.
And we really need to linger on the vocabulary here, because Brown points out that the Greek word used for what Jesus is facing is parasmos.
Parasmos. And from what I understand, that doesn't just mean like a bad afternoon or a tough physical trial. It carries a massive apocalyptic weight.
Oh, definitely. In first century Jewish apocalyptic thought, the parasmos was the great final tribulation.
The end of the world kind of stuff.
Exactly. It was the ultimate cosmic collision between the forces of God and the forces of absolute darkness that would precede the end of the age.
So he isn't just having a panic attack about the physical mechanics of crucifixion. He isn't just afraid of the nails.
No, he is standing at the epicenter of a spiritual black hole. He is feeling the full, crushing weight of human evil, sin, and the horror of death itself converging right on top of him.
So the cup he's pleading to avoid
Is the cup of God's wrath against that evil. He is terrified of being swallowed by the abyss.
And in this moment of sheer terror, he falls to the earth and cries out, "Abba, Father!" And Mark uniquely preserves that original Aramaic word, Abba.
Which is such a visceral, vulnerable word.
It's the intimate term a child uses for a father, right? It's the sound of a child screaming in the dark for a parent.
And the absolute tragedy of Mark's gospel is that this scream into the void seems to be met with total, deafening silence from heaven.
There's no angel.
No angel, no comfort at all.
And that silence from above is perfectly mirrored by the failure from below, because he seeks out his closest friends, Peter, James, and John.
The inner circle. The men who literally hours earlier swore they would die with him.
And he asks them to just simply stay awake, keep watch. And he returns not once, not twice, but 3 separate times and finds them asleep.
The narrative rule of 3 there just twists the knife. It builds the tension and it highlights their complete, utter inadequacy.
He looks at Peter and says, "Could you not keep awake 1 hour?" The isolation is total.
And then it all culminates in the arrest. Judas, one of the 12, arrives with an armed crowd.
And he betrays him with a kiss, taking a universal cultural sign of love and fraternity and weaponizing it into a tool of death.
And once Jesus is seized, Mark writes what I think is one of the most devastating sentences in all of literature. He writes, "And having left him, they all fled."
Everyone.
Everyone.
And Mark includes this incredibly bizarre, almost cinematic detail right here. Amidst the chaos of the torches and the swords, there is this unnamed young man who had been following Jesus, wearing nothing but a linen cloth over his naked body.
It's a very strange moment in the text.
Right. The guards lunge at him, they grab the cloth, and he just slips out of it and literally runs away naked into the night. Why include that?
Scholars have debated it for centuries. Some historical theories suggest it might have been Mark himself.
Like a subtle autobiographical signature, like Alfred Hitchcock walking through the background of his own movie.
Yeah, exactly. But from a literary and theological standpoint, the specific Greek words used are very telling. The young man is a neoniskos, and the linen cloth is a sindon.
Wait, isn't sindon the same word used later for the burial shroud?
Yes, it points to profound symbolism. This young man represents the ultimate unraveling of discipleship.
Oh, wow.
Because the chosen apostles, they didn't just leave. This unnamed follower was so absolutely desperate to sever his association with Jesus that he surrendered his dignity, left his clothes behind, and fled in total humiliating nakedness.
It's the absolute zero of abandonment.
It really is.
Which forces a really uncomfortable question. If you were trying to start a global religion, why would the early Christian church preserve a foundational document where their hero looks so utterly terrified, so vulnerable, and so completely abandoned by God and man?
That's the big question. A panicked, screaming savior doesn't exactly make for great PR, right?
No, not at all.
To understand Mark's theological genius here, we have to look at the community he was writing for. The prevailing historical consensus is that Mark wrote his gospel in Rome sometime in the late 60s or early 70s AD.
Okay, so this was a community traumatized by the Emperor Nero.
Yes, the Neronian persecutions.
This is when Roman Christians were being falsely blamed for the Great Fire of Rome. They were being arrested, tortured, used as human torches in Nero's gardens.
Thrown to wild dogs in the arena, these were real people facing unimaginable horror.
They were terrified.
And realistically, many of them were failing. They were renouncing their faith under the threat of torture. They were betraying each other to the authorities to save their own families.
They must have felt like absolute cowards, and they likely felt completely abandoned by God in the midst of all that suffering.
Exactly. So Mark is acting almost like a war correspondent, writing to soldiers in a trench who have completely lost radio contact with command. He gives them a Jesus who is right there in the mud with them.
Much Jesus isn't some stoic philosopher facing execution with a detached, serene smile.
No. He is a savior who tastes the absolute butter of human despair. It's a theology of profound, gritty solidarity.
So if you are a Roman Christian hiding in the catacombs, weeping because you denied your faith today, you read Mark's gospel and you realize, my Lord knows exactly the terror I am feeling. He begged for a way out too.
He knows what it is like when your friends abandon you. Mark's Jesus enters the darkest abyss so that those trapped in the abyss know they are not alone.
That is just incredibly powerful and makes perfect sense for that specific historical moment.
It really does.
But the beauty of the horizontal reading method is that as we turn our heads to the next scroll, the Gospel of Luke, we see how this exact same historical event is leveraged to teach a completely different spiritual lesson.
Yes, the transition here is jarring.
We move from the crushed, agonizing solidarity of Mark to the composed, forgiving, healing martyr of Luke.
The contrast is startling the moment you put the texts side by side. Luke is a master editor.
He really is. He systematically goes through the Mark and source material and just surgically removes all the rawest edges.
Yeah, Luke completely deletes the phrases about Jesus being greatly distraught, troubled, and sorrowful unto death.
He just scrubs them from the record. And Jesus doesn't throw himself violently to the ground in Luke.
Right, the text says he simply withdrew from them about a stone's throw, knelt down, and prayed.
It's orderly, it's dignified.
Furthermore, instead of Jesus begging repeatedly to escape the cup and hearing nothing but the crickets in the olive grove, Luke provides immediate divine reinforcement.
An angel appears from heaven, actively strengthening him.
Which completely changes the mood.
Now, I have to clarify something here, because even though Luke removes the terror of Mark, he does include a very famous detail. Luke says Jesus was in agony, and that his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground.
Hematidrosis, the medical condition of sweating blood under extreme stress.
Right, which makes it sound like he is still terrified.
Well, this is where reading the text in English translation can actually obscure the author's intent.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we have to look at the specific Greek word Luke uses here. Agonia.
Okay, agonia.
In modern English, agony implies excruciating, unbearable physical or mental pain. But in ancient Greek culture, agonia was primarily an athletic term.
Wait, an athletic term? Like the Olympics?
Precisely. It referred to the intense, hyper-focused state of an athlete at the starting line of a race, or a wrestler warming up before stepping into the ring.
Oh, wow.
It's the physical manifestation of adrenaline and total concentration. It is the tension of the impending contest.
Okay, that completely rewires the scene for me. So he isn't having a mental breakdown. He's practically shadowboxing.
Yes. He is a champion athlete, tensed for the ultimate bout against the forces of darkness.
And the angel isn't just there to, like, pat him on the back and say, there. The angel is like a divine corner man prepping the fighter for the bell to ring.
Exactly. And notice how this composed, dignified posture affects how he interacts with his failing friends.
Right, because in Mark, he scolds Peter.
But in Luke, he only returns to the disciples once, not 3 times. And Luke adds this incredibly empathetic, psychological excuse for them. He writes that Jesus found them sleeping from sorrow.
He softens their failure. They aren't lazy or apathetic cowards. They are just overwhelmed by grief. It's such a gentle editorial choice.
Because Luke is deliberately protecting the reputation of the apostles. Keep in mind, Luke is a 2-part work. the Gospel of Luke, and the Acts of the Apostles.
Yeah.
These sleepy, failing men in the garden are the exact same men who are going to become the bold, fearless leaders of the early church in the book of Acts. Luke doesn't want to undermine their future authority by making them look totally incompetent in the garden.
That makes a lot of sense. But I have to ask, if Mark is giving us the gritty, unfiltered reality of human suffering, isn't Luke just sugarcoating the whole thing? I mean, is he sanitizing the trauma to make it more palatable?
He's not sanitizing history. He's framing it through the lens of the noble death.
The noble death.
Yeah, Luke's audience was largely Gentile. They were deeply immersed in the Greco-Roman world and Hellenistic culture. And in that cultural framework, a hero's death, think of Socrates drinking the hemlock, or the Jewish Maccabean martyrs facing torture, that was defined by absolute composure.
Emotional control.
Exactly. And a serene, unwavering trust in God.
Ah, I see. So a panicked, screaming Jesus wouldn't translate as a divine savior to a Greek audience. They would just see him as weak. They needed a Jesus who mastered his passions.
And this mastery translates directly into how he treats his enemies, which is the cornerstone of Luke's theology. Look at the arrest scene.
Right. The mob arrives, and one of Jesus' followers draws a sword and strikes the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. All four Gospels record this violent moment.
But only Luke includes what happens next.
Jesus says, "No more of this," and he reaches out, touches the bleeding ear of the man who just came to arrest him, and heals him.
It is an absolutely staggering detail.
It is. It's like a paramedic working in an active war zone, stopping to bandage the wounds of the enemy soldier who is actively shooting at him. In his darkest, most unjust hour, Jesus is still the great physician.
It perfectly encapsulates the entire Gospel of Luke. From chapter 1, Luke's Jesus is the one who heals the sick, forgives the sinner, and loves the enemy. The violence of the Passion does not interrupt his mission. It provides the ultimate stage to demonstrate it.
And Luke is essentially providing a survival manual for his readers here.
He is. He knows his community is going to face persecution.
Because in the book of Acts, when Stephen becomes the first Christian martyr and is being stoned to death, what does he do?
He echoes Jesus. He prays for his executioners to be forgiven.
Luke is showing his audience. When the world comes for you with swords and clubs, you don't fight back with violence. You fight back with healing and unshakable peace.
So we have seen the agonizing solidarity of Mark. We have seen the healing, noble martyr of Luke. Now we unroll the fourth scroll. We turn to the Gospel of John.
And if Luke removed the terror of the event, John removes the victimhood entirely.
The Jesus of John's Gospel does not suffer the passion, he orchestrates it.
He operates on a completely different theological stratosphere. Because in John's garden scene, there is no falling to the ground.
No bloody sweat.
There is no prayer begging to escape the cup. In fact, earlier in John's Gospel, Jesus openly mocks the very idea of that prayer.
He does. He says, "Now my soul is troubled. And what should I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it is for this reason that I have come to this hour."
And when the follower cuts off the servant's ear in John's account, Jesus doesn't just heal it. He issues a commanding rebuke. He says, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?"
He is forcefully claiming his destiny. He is the sovereign commander.
And the staging of the arrest in John is just, well, it's an absolute flex of power. Judas brings the arresting party into the garden. But John notes a detail the others miss. This isn't just a rabble of temple guards.
No, Judas brings a spera, a Roman cohort, along with the Jewish police.
And the inclusion of the Roman cohort is a massive historical and literary escalation.
Absolutely. A spera in the Roman military structure could consist of anywhere from 200 to 600 heavily armed professional legionaries.
600 Roman soldiers marching into an olive grove with torches, lanterns, and weapons just to arrest one itinerant rabbi. It is an overwhelming, almost absurd show of military force.
And yet, look at what Jesus does. He doesn't cower in the shadows. He doesn't wait for Judas to point him out with a kiss.
In John, Judas is practically a bystander.
Jesus knows all that is to happen. He steps out into the torchlight, faces down this massive Roman army, and initiates the confrontation. He asks them, "Whom are you seeking?"
They respond, "Jesus of Nazareth." And Jesus replies with two simple words in Greek. Ego, eimi. I am.
And that is not just a casual identification. It's not like, yeah, that's me. Ego eimi is the Greek translation of the sacred, unutterable name of God.
The name revealed to Moses at the burning bush in the book of Exodus. The the divine I am.
Yes. And the physical reaction of the soldiers to the utterance of the divine name is explosive.
The text says that when Jesus said, I am, they stepped back and fell to the ground.
The sheer overwhelming reality of his divine identity acts like a shockwave. It literally knocks a Roman cohort on its back.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it's the ultimate subversion of power. It makes me think of a grandmaster chess player.
I love that analogy.
Jesus is sitting at a board, playing against opponents who think they're winning because they're taking his pieces, but the grandmaster is playing a game 10 moves ahead.
Right.
He is deliberately moving his king into the center of the board. He is allowing himself to be captured, dictating the exact terms of his own surrender, even telling the soldiers to let his disciples go, because he knows that allowing himself to be taken is the only move that achieves checkmate.
John's entire theology is summarized in a statement Jesus makes earlier in the text. I lay down my life. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord.
Oh.
For John, the cross is not a tragic accident of history. It is not an execution. The cross is a coronation. It is the throne from which the king is lifted up to draw all people to himself.
It is breathtaking to see how these texts function when you read them horizontally. You truly get a multifaceted, stereoscopic vision of the event, but the arrest is really just the prelude.
We have to move into the courtroom now.
Right. The deep dive continues as we follow the bound Jesus out of the garden and into the trials. We are going to explore the massive theological ironies of both the Jewish and the Roman trials.
The judicial proceedings are complex, but they generally split into two phases. The religious trial before the Jewish Sanhedrin and the political trial before the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate.
Let's start with the Sanhedrin.
Okay, in the Synoptic Gospels, so Mark, Matthew, and Luke, the core issue is an interrogation regarding Jesus' identity. The high priest demands to know if he is the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One.
And Jesus finally breaks his silence. He affirms it, quoting the book of Daniel, saying they will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power.
And the high priest immediately tears his garments and declares it blasphemy, which triggers the physical abuse.
The temple guards blindfold him, they spit in his face, they strike him, and they play this cruel, mocking game yelling, "Prophesy! Who is it that hit you?"
And Raymond Brown focuses heavily on the profound literary irony operating in this scene.
Because the guards believe they are exposing a charlatan. They are laughing at the idea that he has any prophetic insight.
But by physically assaulting him in this specific manner, what are they actually doing?
They are unwittingly validating his prophetic identity. And not just because he had already predicted that he would be handed over and mocked,
Right.
but because their exact actions perfectly fulfill the ancient poetry of the suffering servant found in the prophet Isaiah, chapter 50. Isaiah wrote, "I gave my back to those who struck me, and my cheeks to those who pulled out the beard. I did not hide my face from insult and spitting."
The Evangelists construct the scene to show that the very attempts to humiliate the Messiah are the exact mechanisms that prove he is the Messiah. Human malice is constantly being repurposed to serve the divine script.
Now, as the proceedings move from the Jewish authorities to the Roman jurisdiction of Pilate, the Gospel of Matthew introduces some incredibly dramatic, unique material centered around a very dark theme: innocent blood.
Yes. Matthew uniquely expands on the fate of Judas here. Judas is struck by deep remorse. He takes the 30 pieces of silver back to the chief priests and confesses, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood."
And the priests coldly reject him. They basically say, "That's your problem."
So Judas hurls the silver into the temple sanctuary and goes and hangs himself. The priests, meticulously observing religious law, refuse to put blood money into the treasury, so they use it to buy a potter's field to bury foreigners.
Talk about layering irony upon irony. They are totally scrupulous about the purity of the temple treasury, but completely apathetic about the purity of the justice system executing an innocent man.
Exactly. And Matthew doesn't stop there. He introduces a dream sequence.
Pilate's wife.
Yes, she sends an urgent message to her husband while he is sitting on the judgment seat. She says, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him."
And finally, when the crowd is actively demanding crucifixion, Matthew paints an unforgettable scene. Pilate physically takes water and washes his hands in full view of the crowd, declaring, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves."
And the crowd roars back, "His blood be on us and on our children."
Okay, if you are listening to this right now, we really have to pause and address the massive historical and ethical weight of these specific passages.
Yes, this is crucial.
Because the blood guilt passage in Matthew, along with the Gospel of John's repeated negative framing of the Jews as a monolithic opposition to Jesus, has a devastating legacy. For nearly 2,000 years, these verses were ripped from their original context and weaponized to justify horrific anti-Semitism, pogroms, and violence against Jewish communities. As we unpack these texts, we are looking impartially at the historical and literary reality of the first century. We are exploring the text to understand the authors, but it is vital to understand the incredibly painful history of how this text has been used. We are not endorsing any viewpoints, simply unpacking the source material.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, to understand why Matthew and John wrote these specific polemical phrases, we have to place ourselves in the trauma of their exact historical moment.
Matthew and John were likely writing in the 80s and 90s AD, right?
Yes, this is after the year 70 AD. In 70 AD, the Roman Empire laid siege to Jerusalem, completely destroyed the city, and burned the Jewish temple to the ground. It was an apocalyptic catastrophe for the Jewish people.
And the early Christian movement, which began entirely as a Jewish sect, was in the midst of a bitter, hostile divorce from the broader rabbinic synagogue community.
They were arguing over who was the true inheritor of God's promises in the wake of the temple's destruction.
Right.
So when Matthew writes, "His blood be on us," he's not pronouncing a universal eternal curse on the Jewish race. He is engaging in first century interreligious polemics.
Matthew's specific community was trying to make theological sense of why their beloved city and temple were reduced to ashes. They looked back at the rejection of Jesus 40 years prior and drew a theological line connecting that rejection to the destruction of Jerusalem.
It is a text born out of sectarian grief and historical trauma, not a mandate for future hatred.
That historical context is so crucial. It changes how you view the text entirely. Now, if we look at the Roman trial through the lens of the Gospel of John, the theological emphasis shifts entirely away from blood guilt and becomes a profound philosophical theater.
John structures the Roman trial in a brilliant, seven-scene chiasm. Pilate is nervously shuttling back and forth.
He goes outside the praetorium to speak to the Jewish authorities, who refuse to enter and defile themselves before Passover.
And then he goes back inside the headquarters to interrogate Jesus.
Pilate is physically trapped between two worlds. Outside is the religious pressure of the crowd threatening a riot, which could literally end Pilate's career.
And inside is this bruised, bleeding rabbi who speaks like a king from another dimension.
And the dialogues inside the praetorium are masterpieces. Jesus tells Pilate, "For this I was born, and for this I came into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice."
And Pilate, this cynical Roman politician, stares at him and asks, "What is truth?"
It gives me chills every time I read it. Pilate is asking what is truth, while standing face to face with the man who, chapters earlier, declared, "I am the way, the truth, and the life."
The ultimate incarnate truth of the universe is standing right in front of him, covered in blood, and Pilate is entirely blind to it because he only understands power in terms of swords and legions.
John is executing a massive subversion here. He is effectively putting the entire Roman Empire on trial.
Exactly. Pilate boasts about his authority, saying to Jesus, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have power to release you and power to crucify you?"
Pilate thinks he holds the keys to life and death. And Jesus, the prisoner in chains, calmly strips the most powerful man in Judea of his illusions. He says, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above."
The empire believes it is passing judgment on a peasant, but John reveals that the peasant is actually the divine word, sitting in judgment over the empire. Worldly power is exposed as a temporary, fragile illusion permitted by God.
Which brings us to the terrifying physical reality of the crucifixion itself and the climax of our deep dive. Jesus is scourged, a crown of thorns is forced onto his head, and he is marched to Golgotha, the place of the skull.
He is nailed to the wood.
And here, in his final moments, the three distinct Christologies we have been tracking, the agonizing reality of Mark, the healing peace of Luke, and the sovereign triumph of John, they all reach their ultimate expression in his final words from the cross.
We begin with the devastating scene in Mark and Matthew. Darkness covers the entire land from the 6th hour to the 9th hour noon to 3 in the afternoon.
It's an unnatural, oppressive eclipse.
And at the 9th hour, Jesus breaks the silence. He cries out with a loud voice, and again, the raw Aramaic is preserved. Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani.
Which translates, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He is quoting the opening line of Psalm 22.
Yes.
Now, I know some commentators try to soften this. They say, well, because Psalm 22 eventually ends in a tone of vindication and praise, Jesus was actually expressing hope. But Brown pushes back hard on that, doesn't he?
Brown insists we read the text within its own narrative reality. In the context of Mark's gospel, there is no bright side.
None at all.
It is a genuine, gut-wrenching cry of absolute desolation. Jesus has been abandoned by his friends, mocked by the crowds, and now he experiences the terrifying absence of God. The text says he simply let out a loud, inarticulate shriek and breathed his last.
There is no comfort on the cross in Mark. The vindication only comes after he is dead. Only when he breathed his last does the massive, heavy veil of the temple sanctuary violently tear in two from top to bottom, signifying that the barrier between God and humanity has been destroyed.
And it is only then that the Roman centurion, a pagan, Gentile executioner who just watched this horrific death, looks at the shattered body and declares, "Truly this man was God's son."
It is the ultimate paradox. The divine identity is revealed not in power, but in the absolute depths of brokenness. But as we turn to Luke, the atmosphere on the cross is completely transformed.
The physical darkness still falls, but the spiritual darkness is absent. Jesus is not forsaken. He is ministering until his dying breath.
He's nailed to the wood, and he prays for the soldiers driving the nails. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing."
He is flanked by two criminals. One mocks him, but the other defends him and asks to be remembered.
And Jesus, dying himself, provides ultimate comfort. "Truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise."
And his final words in Luke are not a cry of abandonment. He draws from a different psalm, Psalm 31. He calls out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit."
It is a prayer of serene, complete trust. He hands himself over to a loving Father and dies at peace.
And finally, we look to John, the sovereign commander on the cross.
In John, Jesus remains in absolute control to the very final second. He knows that all things have now been accomplished.
He ensures that his mother is cared for, entrusting her to the beloved disciple. He fulfills the final scripture by saying, "I am thirsty," receiving the sour wine.
And then he utters one final single word in Greek, tetelestai. It is finished.
And that isn't a sigh of exhaustion, like a worker clocking out of a grueling shift.
It is a victor's cry. It means the work is completed, the mission is accomplished.
Right. Precisely. And notice the active verb John uses for the moment of death. Jesus doesn't simply die. The text says he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
He actively hands it over. He determines the exact moment his life ends, completing his earlier promise that no one takes his life from him.
Looking at these three radically different portraits of the end of his life, it forces a profound question.
So what does this all mean? How did the early Christians reconcile these totally different final moments? Did they fight over which one was the real historical account? Did they try to censor the ones they didn't like?
The profound wisdom of the early church was their refusal to choose just one. When the canon of the New Testament was eventually formalized, they placed all four Gospels side by side.
They embraced the tension.
They did. They inherently understood that the event of the cross, the crucifixion of the Son of God, was an event of such massive, incomprehensible magnitude that no single human perspective could possibly capture it. It is a multifaceted diamond.
You really need to look at it through every possible angle.
You do. You need Mark's gritty, unflinching reality of pain and abandonment, because human suffering and the feeling of divine absence is a stark reality of the human condition.
Yeah.
You need Luke's model of graceful forgiveness to show us how to navigate a violent world with peace and compassion. And you need John's theology of glory to remind us that despite the very real chaos of history, death does not have the final word.
What an unbelievable journey this has been. We've taken the scholar's lens, utilizing Raymond E. Brown's horizontal reading method to unpack the distinct voices of the evangelists.
It really changes how you read the text.
We stood in the olive press of Gethsemane and felt the apocalyptic terror and profound solidarity of Mark's Jesus, who anchors himself in our deepest despairs. We witnessed the athletic healing martyrdom of Luke's Jesus, who turns his own execution into a hospital for his enemies.
And we marveled at the unshakable divine sovereignty of John's Jesus, whose very name knocks empires to the dirt.
We followed him through the corrupt trials of the Sanhedrin and Pilate, seeing how first-century authors used scriptural irony and philosophical dialogue to subvert worldly power and make theological sense of their own historical traumas.
And finally, we stood at Golgotha, hearing three distinct final cries that together encompass the absolute totality of the human and divine experience of death.
If you are listening to this right now, we have seen how these ancient writers tailored their historical accounts to give their specific, struggling communities exactly what they needed to survive their own trials. Mark wrote for the terrified and the failing. Luke wrote for those seeking a model of grace in a cruel world. John wrote for those who needed the absolute assurance that the victory was already secure.
So the texts are incredibly pastoral.
They are. So here's the thought I want to leave you with today. Put aside the historical analysis for a moment and look at your own life. If you were facing the ultimate crucible today, a moment of profound grief, terrible injustice, or paralyzing fear, which of these portraits of Jesus do you actually need the most?
That is a great question.
Do you need the Jesus of Mark, who screams into the dark void right alongside you, proving that you are never alone in your despair? Do you need the Jesus of Luke, who models an impossible peace and gives you the strength to forgive the unforgivable? Or do you need the sovereign Jesus of John, who looks at the terrifying chaos of the world and reminds you that worldly power is just a shadow and the victory is already won? Thank you to our expert for being here today.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for taking this deep dive with us into the profound, complex, and beautiful waters of history and theology. Keep asking questions, keep reading horizontally, and we will catch you on the next one.